Back in the old days, anyone born with something society couldn't explain had two grim choices: live in the shadows or step into the circus. While most of these so-called circus freaks got stared at and judged, a few made it work. They turned their unusual condition into an income and their difference into recognition. So join us for today's video as we head back through time to revisit the 15 circus freaks that shocked the whole world. And trust me, their stories will move you. Number 15. African Dwarf Tommy. Thomas stood about 3 feet tall, but the stages he stood on were built for men far bigger, white, tall, and often in blackface. He was born in 1840 and performed under names like African Dwarf Tommy and Japanese Tommy, labels meant to distract from the truth. He was a black man performing in all-white minstrel troupes during America's most racist era. Dillward could sing, dance, joke, and clown circles around his peers. He debuted in 1853 with George Christie's troupe and later worked with Bryant's Minstrels, top-tier acts of the time. While others wore grease paint to mock his race, he stood there in his own skin, turning minstrel conventions upside down. Some credit him for popularizing the phrase hunky-dory, listed in Bartlett's Book of Americanisms. He died in 1887, mostly erased from the mainstream. But Dillward wasn't just a novelty. He crossed every line drawn to keep him out, and didn't just perform on the stage. He owned it. Number 14. Chay Ma Sang. This little guy stood just 28 inches tall and spent much of his life trying to be left alone. Born in 1838, maybe somewhere in China, he lived quietly on his family's farm before the circus world ever found him. Promoters twisted his backstory, calling him everything from Jewish to Japanese to the smallest man alive. He ignored them for years. Offer after offer came, and he turned them down, until P.T. Barnum himself showed up in 1881 with a paycheck big enough to reconsider. After Tom Thumb's death, Chay stepped into his place and toured the country, performing with Buffalo Bill and other acts. But unlike others, he never chased fame. When the crowds faded, he bought a farm in Indiana, married, and lived in peace. He died in 1926 and was buried in a Jewish cemetery. One last quiet mystery in a life already full of them. Chay Ma didn't live for applause. He lived for something steadier: control, dignity, and quiet defiance. Number 13. The Dahl Family. Gracie Dahl, born Frieda Schneider in Germany, led a family that turned difference into a legacy. She started on stage with her brother Harry as Hansel and Gretel, touring with the 101 Ranch Wild West show. In 1914, they moved to the U.S., later joined by sisters Daisy and Tiny. Together, they became the Dahl Family, a perfectly timed, tightly rehearsed act that toured with the Ringling Brothers for over 30 years. Off-stage, they lived together in Tampa, Florida, rarely separated. In 1932, all four appeared in The Wizard of Oz, and Daisy and Harry played husband and wife in Todd Browning's infamous film, Freaks. An unsettling choice considering they were siblings. But Gracie was never just part of the scenery. She smoked cigars, delivered biting comedy, and shared screen time with Laurel and Hardy in Be Big. Their fame didn't fade with the tent lights. They built something rare: a life, a career, and a loyalty that no script ever could fake. Number 12. Colonel and Mrs. Reuben Steer. Reuben Steer stood 44 inches tall and weighed 43 pounds, but never once carried himself small. He performed with Stone and Murray's Circus and the Lilliputian Opera Company, always dressed sharp and composed, hence the nickname Colonel. In 1880, he married Rebecca Ann Myers, also a little person, and the two became a traveling act. Together, they crisscrossed the country, charming crowds with elegance and humor. But the real story came after the lights dimmed. In 1906, they left show business for Shepashay, Rhode Island, where they ran a candy store, a chicken farm, and even a small roadside restaurant. Reuben took a job as a truant officer, stern, respected, and remembered by every kid in town. The locals didn't call him a sideshow act. They called him Mr. Steer. He died in 1915, not as a footnote, but as part of his town's memory. His life wasn't a gimmick. It was lived fully, honestly, and entirely on his own scale. Number 11. Baron Pouchi. Peppino Magro wasn't built for quiet. Born in Sicily, he stood just over a foot tall by the time he was 15, but size never limited him. An earthquake once collapsed his childhood home, and while others were trapped, Peppino walked out through the rubble. That grit never left. In America, he rebranded as Baron Pouchi, a name that fit his taste for swagger, fine suits, and faster talk. He performed with the Ringling Brothers and became a hit at Coney Island's Dreamland. Audiences laughed, but not at him. They laughed because he controlled the room. In 1931, he married Mavis Lane, a 5-foot woman with enough patience to match his fire, until she didn't. His flirting never slowed down, and eventually, neither did she. She left. Pouchi didn't. He returned to Ringling in the mid-1930s and kept performing like the spotlight owed him. He lived fast, loud, and unapologetic. He wasn't just the smallest man in the tent. He was the biggest personality in it. Number 10. General Willis Carver and his mom. Willis Carver didn't chase fame. It came bundled with his birth. As a little person barely waist-high to his mother, he wasn't just a curiosity. He was half of a headline act. His mother, known in posters as the Fat Lady, toured alongside him in one of the strangest family gigs that circus history ever saw. Willis wore tiny military uniforms and was billed as General Willis Carver. They hit every major circuit: Dan Rice's show, the Sells Brothers, Pullman, and Hamilton, packing dime museums across cities like New York and Chicago. The crowds came for contrast, small beside grand. But behind the scenes, it was a bond, tight, protective, unshakable. They were performers, yes, but also armor for each other. Willis died at just 30 in 1898, long before his mother. She carried on, not just as a performer, but as the keeper of a legacy built one stage at a time. Mother and son, side by side, spotlighted till the end. Number 9. The Roso Midgets. The Roso Midgets weren't twins, but that's how they were billed. Carl and Franz Achtermeyer, later known as Charles and Frank Roso, were brothers born in Vienna in the 1870s, both under 3 feet tall. Their stage name came from their manager, Hermann Rosau, who built their image as twin strongmen. The pair began performing in the 1890s, combining feats of strength with comic boxing matches that packed circus tents and vaudeville halls across Europe and America. In 1909, they sued Rosso for withholding pay and won the right to keep their stage name, proving their business sense matched their showmanship. While most little-person performers were treated as novelties, the Rosso brothers ran their act like professionals, touring for decades before being overtaken by younger troupes like the Mattina brothers. They brought respectability to a cruelly shallow industry, commanding audiences with humor and grit. Long before representation became a word, the Rossos carved their own version of it, one crowd at a time. Number 8. Edmund Ansley. Well, this is just amazing. William Edmund Ansley never set foot in a freak show tent, but the world still stared. At just 42 inches tall, he lived his entire life on display, only he wasn't pitched as bizarre, just marketable. In 1910, the Brown Shoe Company hired him as the walking, talking version of their Buster Brown cartoon. He wore the outfit, velvet jacket, wig, oversized shoes, and traveled from town to town, selling shoes with a smile. He wasn't trying to shock anyone. He just did the job, better than most. For nearly 30 years, Edmund toured the country, logging tens of thousands of miles and becoming the face customers remembered. Stores used his visits to boost sales. Kids lined up for photos. Adults called him the world's smallest man, even if the title was a stretch. When he passed in 1972, his name faded. But in Cook County, Texas, his grave still quietly marks a life lived on his own terms without any circus terms. Number 7. The Seven Dwarfs of Auschwitz. The Ovitz family of Rosavlea, Romania, performed together as the Lilliput Troupe, a musical act of 7 dwarf siblings and 3 average-height relatives. They sang, played instruments, and toured Eastern Europe from the 1920s until war closed in. In 1944, their Jewish heritage led them to Auschwitz, where their survival came by nightmare chance. Josef Mengele, obsessed with genetic anomalies, separated them from the gas chambers for study. Unlike most of his victims, he kept them alive, feeding them and testing their resilience. They were measured, photographed, prodded, but not killed. When the camp was liberated in January 1945, all 7 siblings were still breathing, the largest single family to walk out together. They journeyed home on foot, 7 months through ruined Europe, before rebuilding their act in Romania. By 1955, they had retired and emigrated to Israel. Their story isn't about miracle survival, it's about endurance, unity, and art surviving where humanity almost didn't. The circus era was like hell. Number 6. Jack Dracula. Jack didn't play a part. He was the part. Born Martin Semnak, he started tattooing himself in the 1950s, back when ink got you kicked off buses, denied jobs, and followed by cops. His first tattoo was inked at Coney Island. After that, he never looked back. Arms, chest, face, hands, and more than 400 tattoos eventually covered him. He joined sideshows not because he had to, but because the world gave him no stage big enough. From Hubert's Museum to Palisades Park to the Ringling Brothers, he became a living exhibition, part outlaw, part artist. He wasn't grotesque, he was intentional. Jack turned himself into walking protest art during a time when conformity was the law. Over time, he became folklore, a name whispered in sailor bars, seen in underground films, and finally honored in 2011 by the Sideshow Hall of Fame. But long before the plaque, Jack had already earned immortality, etched not just into skin, but into the bones of circus legend. Number 5. Matron in Miniature. Lizzy Reed, sometimes listed as Lizzy Reed, performed with P.T. Barnum's troupe during the mid-1800s, a name long forgotten, but a face still preserved in an 1865 photograph. She stood barely 3 feet tall and wore the elaborate gowns typical of Barnum's midget courts, acts mixing humor, elegance, and novelty. Her career spanned more than 3 decades, appearing on museum stages and in traveling exhibitions well into the 1890s. While General Tom Thumb became a household name, it was artists like Lizzy who kept Barnum's empire running, steady, polished, and tireless. Her portraits show refinement rather than ridicule, suggesting she carried herself with real dignity in a time that rarely allowed it. Almost nothing survives of her personal life, not even her husband's full name. But her endurance speaks louder than fame ever could. Lizzy Reed may not have ruled a stage like other circus freaks, but she reigned through persistence, one of the longest-working little-person performers of her era. She was a legend. Number 4. Henrietta Morates. She never stood tall, but she left a mark that still lingers. Born in Berlin in 1866, she stood just 26 inches and weighed barely 36 pounds. They dubbed her the German Midget, but those closest to her simply called her Hattie. She arrived in the U.S. in her 20s and performed quietly in dime museums, sometimes rumored under Barnum's name. Her fame wasn't loud. It lived in a single haunting photo, no costume, no exaggerated pose, Just a woman, looking straight into the lens, face firm, eyes direct. In that image, Hattie isn't a freak. She's someone who demanded to be seen, even as the world wanted her reduced to inches. She wore elegant gowns, lived without headlines, and passed without a record. No memoirs, no final bow, just that one portrait, graceful, composed, unforgettable. Her story may have slipped through time, but that photo won't let her vanish. Hattie still stares back, holding her space like only the rarest can. Number 3. Eugene Sandow. Eugene Sandow, born Friedrich Wilhelm Müller in 1867 in Königsberg, Prussia, was more than muscle. He was the prototype of the modern strongman. Promoter Flode Ziegfeld sold him as a living sculpture, the world's most perfectly developed man. Sandow could lift a 269-pound barbell with one arm, carry a pony across a stage, and juggle iron weights as if they were apples. At the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, he appeared nearly nude, his body powdered white to mimic marble. Women paid extra to touch the modern Hercules. Ziegfeld toured him nationwide, turning brute strength into theater. Sandow even published fitness manuals long before gyms became a culture. But his fame carried its own curse. In 1925, his life ended while trying to lift a car from a ditch. His brain ruptured under strain. Even in death, his myth endured. Film star Harry Langdon later immortalized him as Sandow in The Strong Man. Sandow didn't just flex power, he defined how the world would see it. All right, guys, now let's end this journey with Number 2. Grace Gilbert. Grace's beard grew longer than her patience for sideshow expectations. Born in Ohio in the late 1800s, she entered circus life as a teenager and quickly became one of America's most famous bearded ladies. By 1901, her beard reached 18 inches, outgrowing every rival. She worked with Ringling Brothers, Barnum, and McCadden's Circus, often promoting herself as the girl with the golden whiskers, after briefly dyeing it yellow. Grace was tough, known to do the kind of manual work usually reserved for men. When she married in 1910, one paper joked that the minister hesitated to identify the groom. After trying to settle into private life, she returned to the stage at Coney Island in 1916 and stayed there until her death. Grace was more than her beard. She was independent, unashamed, and professional. In a business built on oddities, she turned mockery into livelihood and carried herself with the kind of strength that didn't need applause to prove itself. Number 1. Jolly Emma. Jolly Emma's real story is mostly gone, lost in torn postcards and old ad clippings. What survives is a grin, big, bold, and somehow tragic. She was billed as the happy fat lady, often posed beside American flags or wooden benches, her enormous figure-centered frame. One postcard claimed she weighed 620 pounds. True or not, that number sold tickets. And Emma? She gave them a show. Back then, fatness wasn't a private issue. It was monetized. Bodies like hers weren't hidden. They were displayed, sold, and stared at like living billboards. Emma made people laugh. She stood tall in her skin, smiling wide, even if it hurt. We don't know if she hated the gawking. Maybe she did. Maybe she learned to own it. We don't know where she was born or when she died. But the way she held herself in those pictures, chin high, eyes knowing, says enough. She wasn't just jolly. She was undeniable. And she meant to be seen. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for hanging with us. We'll see you soon.